good afternoon again. So like I said before you came in, I like to get a feel for the class to see where you are in company law, so I know where to begin. So let's start with you. Why not? She's busy writing, so I can start with you. Come.
So what do you want to know?
Name, what you do, and how much you know in company law.
Okay. My name is Deshawn Forbes, and I work at the Future Third Class. I'm a legal assistant. I have a degree in law, but it's antiquated. It's old. I've never practiced. I have an LLB, but I haven't studied the law.
Oh, okay. All right.
So I'm feeling my way back in. I knew the basics, but
okay. All right.
so it's all the most that I did in school was mercantile, and that was like focusing on sequestration and receivership.
Okay. All right.
Directorship. So it was, you know.
All right.
Good day, everyone. My name is Delores Dorset. I am employed at Trident Corporate Services. I've worked from the ground up through finance over the last 22 years, 2 different companies. Over the period, I've only been certified for classes in introduction, intermediate to advanced, and IBC, company law, funds, foundations, along those lines with the service provided. I just decided to kind of be more serious, so I decided to come to FIPS for something a little bit more detailed or tailored, and I hope to succeed.
Okay. And share.
And share.
Yes.
And share.
I'm Cindy Young. I'm at Santander Bank and Trust. I work in internal control / in the past 2 weeks I'm assisting on the legal desk. I know absolutely nothing about company any law. So hence my enrollment in this class, so I know zero.
What a switch.
It's not a switch, we did a downsize.
Oh, so you just
and so we have a lot of slashes after the switches. Assisting the legal desk is my new slash.
Okay. Alright. Okay.
Morning, Emma Bullock, Bank of Bahamas, Compliance Department. I did a little bit of company when I used to work in the law firm, but I need a refresher.
Okay. Good. Get there.
Good afternoon, my name is Kimberly Miller. I'm an attorney, U.S. trained though, so I thought it'd be important to appreciate the nuances in the Bahamian legal aspect. I work in-house in a legal department. My primary area of focus is not company law, but in the instance that I do is typically with the assistance of external counsel. So that's also a reason why,
I've set up for
have the foundation.
Yeah, you're the last.
Hi, my name is Krizia Pratt. I work for More Development. I'm an attorney as well. I've had some experience with companies, but just wanted to come for more details, brush up.
Oh, okay. So you are at a disadvantage in the back there.
Very much so. I need a lot of help.
You really are.
Yeah.
Well, there's supposed to be more students, and maybe you may have some help later down. Hopefully.
Hopefully.
All right. So what you need in addition to the manual, you need a copy of the IBC Act and a copy of the Companies Act and all of its amendments. Okay? So now that I have a feel of the background and I know how to word my capstone and my exams.
Wasn't expecting an exam.
When the first
Was it
day.
just me?
No worries,
Not
but
today.
Not today. No, I know,
Oh,
but like I
I
wasn't expecting like at all.
I mean, that's your choice, you know. If you just want a certificate to say you participated, that's fine. But if you're gonna go through all of this, you might as well take the exam. Yeah. Why not?
Why not?
Why not? Okay, so let's begin.
You didn't tell us about you.
Me? Okay. Well, if students normally don't ask, they only want to know the name and that's it.
Well, I missed that part.
I didn't get that part either. It's on the register. You gotta register in the book, the class schedule. So I'm Christine Archer. I am a banker by profession and an attorney. I've worked to Central Bank worked there for 32 years. And then I moved into commercial banking and now I'm in auction. So that's what I do.
Nice to meet you, Ms. Arthur.
So I've taught here at BIS for the last 11 years. Alright, so let's start. So the first unit is on general company law principles. So who can tell me without reading, except for my new friend in the back, she'll be the one who will reinforce things. What is a company? In your own words, what is it? You ready to jump in, so let's go. Yes, you are. Okay, so you go way back. So let me start with the fresh ones there.
Yes, I go way
Yes,
back.
I can let you jump in later.
I like her. I go way back.
Yeah, but she did this a long time ago, so her memory can come back slowly but surely. You. So let's go.
I'll put it into words.
Yeah, put it into words.
Okay, maybe it's a vehicle used by people for different reasons and purposes.
A common objective.
Yes.
Yeah. It's difficult to find the words for a company actually.
Yes.
Think about it.
You can.
I remember reading and from my classes that it was an artificial
It's an artificial person.
Yes.
What
With
else?
rights and privileges and just like a person.
Just like an actual person. What
And
else?
separate from the directors and the shareholders.
Separate from the shareholders.
Yes.
What else?
Individual.
It's created for a specific purpose, and in most cases, it's used as a shield to protect the persons that act on behalf of the company from certain levels of liability.
But is that the main purpose for incorporating a company?
Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is.
My friend in the back there, you getting this?
I'm writing.
I don't want you to just write, I want you to understand.
Okay.
What's a company?
So a company is
You know many. So let's go. Use one as an example. It's easier for you to remember. Take any company. Kelly's.
okay. So, like she said, it acts as an artificial person. The purpose is to provide goods. So it was created for a specific purpose. And that's all I got so far.
That's
What
it?
they say.
No, that is not true. That is not true. That's all you wrote? No. Start again. Give her your part. She has the part with the purpose. She has
Right.
that for
Yeah,
a
right.
purpose.
Pretty much a vehicle.
She has
for
that part
personal
as an artificial entity. Your part.
It protects persons from liability.
She didn't have that.
From limited, from a degree of liability.
Yeah, the degree. It's not total.
Yeah.
Okay.
What else? In the back.
It has its objectives. It's
Yeah,
formed
it's
for
got
a
a
particular
purpose.
objective in mind.
She have something to say.
Because we're using Kelly's, the specifics for Kelly's is that it's offering, like she said, goods and services. And they're not the only person, but their range of service is causing them to be classified to say, in the financial field, service provider. They want to be a top class service provider to that degree.
Yeah, I understand.
We narrowed it down
Explain
to
it.
Kelly's. I'm trying to,
No, I just said Kelly's for her because she's not in the field and it's
So
easier
she's-
for her to see
Okay.
what a company is.
oh,
So
no,
what,
that's-
okay, so
that's
what
not-
example are
that
you
don't count.
using? You using an FCSP?
Some are for profit.
You only go in business if you're going for profit.
Well, I mean, social and non-profitable organizations.
Yeah,
are
little bit
also
diff- yeah.
companies.
They differ.
Yeah, they differ. But I'm trying to see the point she's trying to make. Say it again, explain it a different way.
Okay. The industry has service providers.
Which
Financial
industry now?
The financial
Okay,
industry.
uh-huh.
Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot. And with being a service provider, you want to come out on top, being the first choice.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone can say, "Oh, let's go to RBC. RBC fee is too high, man."
Mm-hmm.
So, well, Scotia offering this, so it's more for competition, so you could be considered the number one provider. When you do a company?
You mean that's the rationale for incorporating?
For incorporating or being in existence for business.
In the, so you gave two examples of banks.
Right.
In order to be a bank, you have to be a company.
Aren't finance companies or lending companies?
And I mean, you have to be a company.
Right, existing
Incorporated
company-
as a company.
Right.
Yeah.
Old time Barclays used to be LPC, limited lending
Yeah.
company or something.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Because I was Barclays out of London.
Right. So when it was registered here, it had to form a
It had to form a company.
company. That's what I'm getting at.
Oh, that's what you meant.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a big company. We got that in back?
I think so.
What she said.
She said, say it again.
Even I was sometimes.
Yeah, say it again.
For a company to be here that may have existed somewhere else, it has to be formed
Yes. Or it can continue.
or continue, because continuation support.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
So you still have to technically exist, create it. With
So you said she moved from one thing to the next, right? So like for her, you gotta stay on the same track, cause otherwise she's gonna get confused. Okay? So let's go from the basics then. So we know the first thing, the company is a group of persons with a common objective, and that's why they form a company. Where are you? You on the right page?
Okay, so,
11. Before that's for you to read when you get home. So you can say there are three types of companies: those that are formed for profit, or those are for charitable or other purposes. Companies formed to enable a single proprietor or a small group of partners to carry on business. Or companies are formed to enable the investing public to share in the profits without taking part in its management. So those are public companies. Note that a company can be straddled between either one of the categories to achieve its objectives. So most companies now, when you look at its objectives, it's just general. It doesn't stipulate in the memo on answer, I am going to sell shoes. It doesn't say that. It's just general. The business license will determine what they do. Or the other license that they want from the regulator, that license will say what they do. So to form a registered company, the requirements of registration must be met and documents prepared as required by the legislation. So that's why you have to get your copy of the legislation. The next thing you need is to peruse the Department of Inland Revenue website, because they tell you what's required for licensing. The shareholders are the owners of the company, and their forum is the AGM of shareholders. And directors provide the management of the company, and their forum is the board meetings. So let's go back at the last, no, not the last, the one before the last, the chairman of the then BEC. What was wrong with the member of parliament speaking out?
It
He was,
overstepped the board.
right, he wasn't part of the board of directors.
He was from the government in itself.
No, he didn't overstep the board. He was chairman of the board.
Okay.
He was the chairman of the board. His actions, were they right or were they wrong?
What did he do?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to remember what he did.
Speaking out about.
Speaking out about everything.
Yeah.
He was the one that was speaking of what he believed to be personal expenditure of one of the,
Well, he did more than that.
okay.
He did more than that. He
Call his
spoke
name,
about
please.
Miller.
Oh, we're going all the way back down.
Yes, I said not the one that just. I said the one
Oh,
he described.
okay,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's too much to contain,
Yeah.
cause we were still processing the current last one.
Yeah.
not
Right.
the one.
Yeah, no, we didn't get to that one yet. We got this one going back. Because that's a very good example of the roles that people play.
Oh, in that aspect, he was both, he was the board and the government.
He was the chairman.
But also a sitting member of parliament.
Chairman
He's
of the
with
board of
government.
directors.
Mm-hmm. So should he have been the one speaking out?
No, it could have come out, but it should have come from somebody else probably.
Who's somebody else?
Is the board not responsible for the management?
No, the management company was separate and apart, wasn't it? That's the lady,
It's management.
the lady from the US? That was the lady from the US.
Yeah, I can't remember the story. At the time, yeah, she was after, she was.
She was after. She was after.
Not Darnell, this is the other lady, the first lady.
No,
who
we ain't
was-
talking about Donnell. We ain't talking about the American lady. We're talking before that.
Oh, wow.
When every time there was a comment from the company, he spoke as chairman of the board to the public.
Leaders for your PR person.
The PR person. That's general management job. They are separate and apart.
Okay.
Separate and apart. So directors provide the management of the company, and their forum is the board meeting. So you have the chairman, and then you have the directors. And a representative from management is always on the board. Management takes direction from the board. So if you want to speak about the day-to-day runnings of the company, it is the CEO of the company. Under the direction of the chairman / the board, not the chairman speaking out. Because he's not responsible for the
Say it
day-to-day
again.
management
Go back
of the
again,
company.
Please. Go back again, please. Say it again.
You have the board. The
Yes.
board is comprised of the chairman and different members.
Yes.
You can look at it in different ways. You can look at it as a bank, where the bank has the chairman and it has different directors. Or you can look at it as a government entity, where you see the composition of the directors is published. They're all publicly people within that the government selects. But each person has a role to play. So the board is responsible for the strategy. They decide which direction this company is going in, under the leadership of the chairman. So he may have been right in terms of his idea of where he wanted BEC to go. He would have been right saying, but I want us to do windmill rather than oil. Right? But when he comes up with those ideas, he's supposed to sit down with the CEO and ask the CEO, is this feasible? Can we do this? Go and get your team to write out a plan how we can achieve this to present it to the board. That's how it works. Not you have an idea and you tell the public, oh, no, we should have done this. No, you have to present it to your
Lack
board.
of communication.
No, you have to know your role.
Yes.
Chairman of the board doesn't mean you're chair of everything. Because really when you speak, you only speak at the board. But when you speak, you should have already spoken to your CEO. Because the CEO is the one who's going to drive what it is that you want to do. That's the separation. They're not one and the same. So now what was wrong with Donnell? That's the woman who came in.
Just the current situation.
No, she ain't current.
Well, no.
She's ex.
She's
Current
ex.
ex situation.
What was her issue?
So she she was a member of the board, if I'm not mistaken, and the person that was speaking of things that she may or may not have done, maybe outside of what she was.
Was the minister.
Oh, it was the minister.
It was the minister.
Okay. So if I remember correctly, he was claiming that she had probably abused her fiduciary duties, and she had charged the corporation for her personal expenditures, and I think there was a photography or something
Makeup and all them, yeah.
which as a board member you cannot do, and so that was one of her issues, is that
So it comes to this false perception that people have that when you are a director, that you can do whatever you feel like doing. And that if it's not within the corners of your contract, you're permitted to do it with reason. Doesn't work that way in company law. When you become a director and you sign that sheet of paper, you have by law a fiduciary duty, and it's not written in the contract by law. And when we do duties further down, you'll begin to see there's certain things that you should do, certain things you should not do, and they're not written in that contract.
But isn't the issue now that, well, they're putting forth that they were wrongfully terminated?
That's employment law.
Yeah,
That's a different issue.
Yeah.
That's a different issue.
And too, I think she also spoke to the fact that the board had a lot of political interference on all, like when they made major decisions. I think I read in one of the dailies that she said they had a lot of political interference.
Okay, and she was the chairman, right?
Yes.
Okay, so she's the chairman. And your duty as the chairman of the board is to act in the best interest of the company.
Right.
That's first and foremost. And if after you have sat down as a chairman with your CEO, your CFO, whoever's the people doing the run the day-to-day, if they don't think that the decision that's coming from the government is in the best interest of the company, you have to make that decision. Because at the end of the day, you're the one who's going to be blamed for it.
The CEO.
No, the chairman.
Chairman.
You have that responsibility to, okay, if you look at the situation the company is in now, who is to blame? The people who were chairman and CEO at those times.
Is it justified blame though? I mean, okay, I might be the chairman of the company. We meet. This is my director.
You, as the chairman, you have the air of the political party. You agree?
Well, I assume
Because
that's
you're a
why
member
you
of
appointed
parliament.
me.
You're appointed. You have them. They're
my
going to talk whatever it is they have to
appointment
talk.
is based on political.
Agree? But when you take
But
on
as a
that role of chairman,
professional, right? But my prior field as a professional, it had me at because what was I, some
then
major
you
accountant,
decline.
whatever.
If you cannot handle the position, you decline. If you take on the position, you have a fiduciary duty to that entity.
Which I think was what she was practicing because of what is her first career, being a fiduciary agent. She was major accountant, whatever. So we meeting, and though I said solar, windmill, whatever, we all got our appointments because there's no voting, no public voting.
Okay, all right. So we're all on the board.
But I'm unaware that you have a listening ear to somebody else who you feel more liable to. So despite us communicating, the board going through, you liaising with your immediate department, but you're still telling your political, maybe this could actually work, or this could be whatever, see this as a problem coming down the line. As far as you come back concerned, you crunch the numbers and you say, okay, well, we could work this out in the next 7-year spread. Fine. If we work towards it in terms of getting the collections and grandfathered in by whatever old bills. We come back, and as far as I'm concerned, this is what I see. But lo and behold, something was behind the scenes. Okay, fine, I could bow out, but that's still not for the betterment of the people that you still appointed me for. Or is that still not the point of it?
Why would it be for the betterment of the people?
Or the company?
It's the company.
But the political outside interference didn't make that possible. Because it's still
What I don't understand is if I am the chairman, and based on my conversation with the CEO, they say I need windmill or whatever it is I need.
Right.
Right? The CEO brings a plan and how it's supposed to be done. You take that plan to the board. Once the board votes on that, yay or nay, then the CEO job is to carry it out. That's it. The only way I can hear you say this plan cannot be carried out is because then the government says we don't have sufficient money to do it.
Okay.
Or you can get it, but I only could give you $10. Go and collect the rest of that money. And then the board then decides, guess what? It's going to take us 2 years to collect. And so the plan will not kick in 2020, it'll kick in 2022. And so every time you come to a board meeting, you say, this is where we are in terms of collection. We're almost there. That is how you run a company. It's not this one say this one. No. What is in the best interest of this company?
And you as the head.
And you as the head, you drive that. Who in your companies now, in your bank, do you ever hear the chairman walking around telling you, oh, we're going to make some people redundant? Oh, no, we close. You don't hear that, right?
Until after I don't see them come to work.
Exactly. You never know what the chairman is thinking. You don't know whether he agreed, disagreed. You don't know. Because in that role, your job is to drive the company where it needs to go to make a profit. Not to showboat yourself. And I see a lot of that here. People take on these roles and they do not understand what the roles mean. So there are lots of examples, Randy, you could use in your exam. Moving on. So the company is a legal entity distinct and separate from its shareholders and its principals. As a separate entity, a company is not an agent of its shareholders and principals. It's considered an artificial legal entity and not a natural person. It has perpetual succession, which means that its existence is maintained by the constant succession of new persons who may replace those who die or remove from the company. So in the financial industry, whenever there is a change in shareholders, that requires approval. The same if you have a private company and you have shareholders, if you want to bring a new one on, someone wants to be removed, everybody must agree. What are they bringing to the table? Got that? So if you went back to how government runs companies and makes appointment, to me they should be appointed based on what skills they're bringing to the table. And if they don't have the requisite skills, then none of these corporations will ever be run properly. You must have the skills. A company survives the mental and physical incapacity, resignation, removal, and any of the shareholders or its members, because it is an artificial entity. And it has continued existence despite the changes in its membership. So the company continues, even though shareholders move and new ones are appointed. The company continues. So a registered company has advantages, mainly its separate legal status, its limited liability, and separation of ownership and management. Incorporation brings about legal roles and responsibilities which some persons may not wish to undertake. And that's what I'm saying. When people heard, okay, I've been appointed to this board, they're happy. First thing they want to know is whether it's a paying one. But they do not seek to find out what exactly does that role entail. Okay, rather than conducting business through this mechanism, individuals may wish to operate as a sole proprietorship or trader, or form a partnership with two or more persons. So what's a sole proprietorship? You have many of them around here.
Only person owning a company or shares in a company.
If you want an example.
You have many of them around here. Let's see if you could find one.
One single. As in one person, as in you or me. Not you're my sister, you're my brother.
Not family.
It could be a group.
Oh, okay then. That's
So
the
Kelly's is a sole proprietorship, right?
Or butlers.
There's a family.
Butlers, that's family owned.
That's for family.
There are a lot of people here that are just trading as So-and-so trading house.
Yeah, those are sole proprietorship. The little trading house. Those small ones. So there are advantages and disadvantages when you are a sole proprietor. What's the advantages?
Decisions fall in line with you,
You make your own decisions.
and the profit fall to you too.
All the profit is yours. You do with it as you please. What else? Expenses are less.
This is true.
Mhm. You can change your business however you want it.
Adjust it to whatever.
Without a board of directors.
Or approval
But
pending.
yeah, you don't need no proof from nobody. You make your own decisions. You want to sell corned beef today, you could. You want to sell tuna tomorrow, you could do that. You only want to sell on over the hill, you could do that. Whatever decisions you want. What's the disadvantage?
Take on
You
all the
own it.
liabilities.
You have all the liability.
Every single
You
inch.
can be sued. So, if I were to compare a sole proprietorship with a partnership, what's the difference? When we say we form a partnership, 3 people, 2
You're
persons,
someone,
4 persons.
you have accountability and you have to share decisions.
You have to share decisions, yes. You have to share liability too.
Yes.
What else?
Increased expenses.
You have increased expenses.
And a profit share is split.
So which type of companies are normally partnerships?
Law firms.
Law firms
Accounting firms.
and accounting firms. So with regard to partnerships, creditors may sue partners individually to satisfy the obligations of the partnership when necessary. Partners are liable for the actions of the other partners where such actions were done on behalf of the partnership or in the partnership name, subject to certain exceptions. Conversely, the liability of a company is limited, and shareholders' assets or losses with regard to the company's actions cannot exceed the amount that they invested in the company. That's why you see a lot of Bahamians now forming companies, because they learn more now about companies, then they want to limit their exposure to liability. Some do it to shield themselves from spouses. Why is it? That's what they do.
Oh, I know.
Are you talking about in terms of being sued for alimony and all of that?
Yes.
When the divorce comes, so
It's
it's still limited to the
an
amount of the
artificial
company.
entity. It
Yeah, as
doesn't.
far as
That's
you're
not a
concerned,
part of
the
it.
company owns that, not
The
me.
company owns it. So that's what
They can put all their money underneath the company and
Property,
all that
money,
property,
it doesn't matter,
whatever.
shares, whatever you wanna keep to
put it
yourself.
all in a company. Incorporate in a company. Remember that a company is a separate legal entity. So I have all of these assets, and I'll take all of these assets and make them the assets of the company. So you no longer have an access to those.
so it's an alternative to what you call it?
What?
Gosh, what you call it? When you want to get married and you don't want
A prenup?
Yeah.
No, don't forget that prenup is an actual contract
Okay.
that we both sign and we agree.
But I mean, it could be a way of.
No, when I put my assets in a company, it is not a prenup.
No, I know it's not a
Yeah,
prenup,
you just
but
don't have access to it
I just mean
anymore.
it's a way of, it's another way of.
I'm saying, yeah, you can't get my assets.
Get my money.
Yeah.
Yes.
Unless I contributed towards those assets.
Yes. I get you. Right.
What happened on your fingers? No, why your fingers twiddling? You thinking now what?
No,
Yeah.
when she said prenup, it threw me. I was like, it can't necessarily be. The only way it could be is the person who's one of the individuals signing obviously has something.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah,
meaning-
yeah, yeah.
I wasn't
acceptable
meaning
to
it
this
as a
prenup.
prenup.
No, I know.
I
Yeah,
just
she
meant
was
the
just
way
trying to.
And then I remember the case in point, but I was trying to see if that would have worked in that instance.
A lot of
But-
Bahamians are agitating for prenup though.
Yeah.
Yeah, they want that. The men.
Oh yeah.
But wasn't a case, didn't a case go through? I think Hallsbury Chambers was dealing with it at some point, where the court actually upheld that prenup was valid.
But true.
Yeah. attorney on that was Narissa Green. It was about 5 years ago, I think.
Well, wait, I
6 years
mean,
ago.
so in the years that we were married, you're saying what? Because like she
prenup
said,
was
unless
drafted
it's something we
Yeah,
contributed against.
it was an agreement. I'll have to pull it up. I'll get it for the next class, but it was an agreement between the husband and the wife,
Bahamians?
Bahamians, that they drafted, and ultimately I think they got a divorce, and the court held that the agreement was valid.
No, I gotta read that.
Yeah, I'll bring the case.
I think if the circumstances are that.
That's what I'm saying, we can see the circumstances around it.
I'll try and get the case for everyone
Yeah.
for next week.
It's the circumstances.
Yeah.
But you can see how it's
Yeah.
they're not for that.
Yeah.
You see, she ready. She ready.
He was like,
ready. She ready.
Just reading.
Yeah.
You got it.
what did I start?
No,
Nothing.
no. This is how
Listen,
it's acknowledged.
But my thing
And some
question
people have a
is-
lot of stuff happening in them and don't even
Yeah,
know
because
whether
a lot
they
of
can
women,
combat
a
it
lot of
or
women
they
are
have to
under
go
the
along with the place.
anticipation that,
But
okay,
it's
my husband has all of these things, and when he die, I'm going to get it, and then come to
And
find
they
out
come
they
to
get
find
nothing.
out.
Yeah, you get nothing.
Sometimes it's the
But
circumstances.
you would know, wouldn't you? Because if you signed a prenuptial
No,
agreement.
No, but I'm
It
just
ain't
talking
nothing
in
to do with
general.
It's general. You're in a
In
marriage, as
general.
far as you're concerned.
You're in a
being
marriage, so
taken
you
care
figure
of.
that, okay, he has that business there and that business there. I know we have that property there,
Uh-huh.
that property there. You
And this is
thinking
my
now,
account, and
okay,
this
all
is
right.
gonna
He
have
ha-
fix, and this
right.
and da da da.
He tells
When
you everything.
I close,
You found out they're all in the company. Then you drop down there.
Oh, exactly.
That's why I said. That's why I said it's a kind of way to shield your money and not give it to the wife.
Or husband.
Or
husband. Yeah.
I'm not only doing it to stay on the victim side. I'm trying to come on top too. What you think? No, but knowledge is power, and that's something a lot of people don't have access to.
So
Because you really wouldn't know.
No.
this class is beneficial, right?
Nice to meet you. So a company can issue more shares, they can add directors, shareholders, expand, downsize. If it's not already included in the M&A, then you can always amend the M&A.
You may have to say M&A, what M&A is for her.
I know what that is.
She know what that is. Don't forget she's,
I get that
don't
part.
forget she's
Okay.
assistant legal.
All of 2 weeks.
Yeah. So while a shareholder is liable to contribute to the payment of a company's debts, he is not liable to pay them himself. A creditor cannot sue him nor compel him to pay such part of the debt as is equal to the amount of the unpaid capital in respect of his shares. Remember, he's only liable to what he's paid up in terms of his shares. A company established in the Bahamas under the Companies Act, or it can be under the IBC Act. Upon reservation of a name, the statutory filing of the M&As, and the issuance of a certificate of incorporation. Who's the new registrar?
Salian.
Salian.
Lockhart. I can't remember the March name.
Yeah.
I can't remember.
Lockhart,
I see a
yeah.
picture. I can see a picture of the people. That's about it. Okay, so the case that actually determined that an individual is separate from a company is the case of Solomon versus Solomon, which you must know by heart. Oh, so your hands move now. So in here I've written out a little snippet of it. You can always go online and read it. And in this instance, Mr. Solomon conducted a leather merchant and boot manufacturing business. He incorporated a limited liability company to take over this business. His wife, daughter, and his son signed as subscribers to the memorandum. Each one share. The subscribers then appointed Mr. Solomon and 2 of his sons as directors of the company. He was paid £39,000 for the business, and as part of the consideration for the sale of the business, he received fully paid up shares and debentures to the value of £10,000, which he subsequently assigned to another party. The business failed, the company became insolvent, and a liquidator was appointed. The liquidator attempted to hold Mr. Solomon liable for the debts of the company, including the ground that the whole transaction was a fraud on the company's creditors. You got that? It's saying that he incorporated the company just to enable him not to pay his debts. The liquidator also asserted that the company was Mr. Solomon's agent and that he should indemnify the company and its creditors for the debts incurred by the company. Mr. Solomon appealed the decisions in the lower court, which both agreed that the company was only an agent of Solomon, and that the formation of the company and the issue of the debentures were a scheme to enable Solomon to carry on business in the name of the company with limited liability, and to enable him to obtain priority over other creditors by means of the debenture. But the House of Lords concluded to the contrary. They said the company had been duly formed and registered and was not a mere agent of or trustee of Mr. Solomon. Said when the memorandum is duly signed and registered, a body corporate is formed and it cannot lose that status by issuing the bulk of its shares to one person. You understand what that means? Because he moved, once he followed all of the requisite steps to incorporate a company, and he received that certificate of incorporation, he is separate and apart from the company. So he said here the company is at law, different person altogether from the subscribers to the memorandum. And though it may be that after incorporation the business is precisely the same as it was before, because it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if he was selling shoes before and he's selling shoes now. Just by going through that process of incorporation, it's actually a separate legal entity. They're not one and the same. It says, though it may be that after incorporation the business is precisely the same as it was before, and that the same persons are managers, and the same hands receive the profits, the company is not in law the agent of the subscribers or trustee for them, nor are the subscribers as members liable in any shape or form, except to the extent and in a manner provided by the Act. So he could have argued in saying that Mr. Solomon was an agent for the company, but he wasn't, because he filled all the requirements. You could have said that Mr. Solomon was a trustee, which means he's holding the assets of the company in trust. But according to the principle in this case, and by the House of Lords, they said no. Once you incorporate a company, following all the requisite requirements, which is have your subscribers, do your M&A, pay your fees, get a certificate of incorporation, get all the environmental, Department of Environmental, Inland Revenue, TIN number and all of that, you are a company. Town planning, all of that. Follow all of the requisite steps.
TIN number?
Yeah,
Is it
Tax.
yeah, you have a TIN number.
Tax identification.
This Solomon principle affirmed that a company is not per se the agent of its shareholders, even if control is concentrated in only one shareholder. The mere fact that a person owns all the shares in a company does not make the business carried on by that company his business. Once the company is legally incorporated, the company is treated like any other independent person with rights and liabilities of its own. Got that? Alright. I can let you read the case of Gramophone when you go home. So there are two exceptions to the Solomon principle, that a company is an entity distinct from and not the agent of its shareholder. One is where an agency relationship exists between the company and its shareholders based on the facts. And the second one is where the corporate structure conceals the true facts, that is a mere facade. And in this case, is where the court looks behind the company to the actual shareholders. So an agency relationship may arise in the context of group companies, where the parent company will plead that the subsidiary is its agent. And the case of that was Smith Stone versus Birmingham Corporation. The issue at hand,
Which page you on, please?
15. The issue at hand was the compensation for compulsory purchase payable by the local authority when the property of a subsidiary company was acquired. The judge stated that an agency relationship was a question of fact. In this instance, he identified a variety of factors that would assist in determining whether the relationship was one of an agency relationship. Who was really carrying on the business? Who received the profits? Who was actually conducting the business? Who appointed those persons? Who was the head and brains of the venture? Who was in fact in constant control of the business? So every time you see a company is being sued, the court doesn't look just at who is running the company, but who's actually giving the instructions, the mind and management. Because you could have directors on paper, which is her and her nominees, but sometimes the court go behind that. Where is the mind and management? Who are they taking instructions from? And to me, I see that as being the next stage for CRS. Right now, we will actually look at who are the directors on record, but they're not the mind and management. They're taking instructions from somebody else. So that's what a lot of people are afraid of now. Once all of these reports go out this year, everybody will be sending information on these are the directors who operate these companies. But they're not the mind and management of these IBCs. They're not.
They are acting on behalf of the client.
They act on behalf of the client. And they want their taxes.
Well, their jurisdiction wants their taxes.
They want their taxes. So that means that when we send the information in July, and by the time they finish assessing that in 2020,
They don't know if they're taxing IBCs.
no, they're gonna say they didn't get sufficient money. That's what they're gonna say. So there's a loophole, and they're gonna figure out how to get it. It's a bigger picture. Because it first started with IBCs being used for money laundering.
What is an
But they didn't-
international
Business company. They didn't do too much for tax evasion at that time, because you could use other structures to evade taxes. Not necessarily an IBC. You can actually structure it in a way whereby you pay less tax. If you should, based on your operation, should have paid $100, and how you structured, you only paying $5, that's not
That's
illegal.
still within the law.
That's within the law. So what they're doing now is they're attacking the vehicles themselves. The mechanism of the vehicles. And so that means that all IBCs must substantiate their presence here in the Bahamas. Which means put them on equal footing as a regular company.
Less
That's the register of members public registry, not so much public.
And more, they must have an actual physical presence.
Does that mean opening an office?
Yes. Hiring staff. But how is it going to work?
Yeah, because if you're already paying fees to a registered office.
There you go.
What's another lucrative field again? Sorry, I'm about to get out of a job.
That's why you're here.
What's the next class?
Stop running that.
So those are the things you have to think about. As in your business, you have to think about how can you retain those clients? What's the advantage of maintaining the IBC? And are they willing to convert to a regular company?
In that aspect, what's the point of a nominee?
You may not be able to use that either. That's what I just finished telling you.
That's the point.
Not just in
CRS.
terms of the structure and evasion, but in terms of them wanting their taxes.
Sounds like a lot of dissolutions about to happen.
No, instead of dissolution, continue them as something else. You need to have that conversation. Because it's not driven by us. It's driven by other countries who want their money.
So what is the nominee?
A nominee is a company that has a license to provide corporate services as a director or as a shareholder. And so if you're a person, you say, okay, I want to purchase an IBC to do business abroad, you would go to an FCSP, Financial Corporate Service Provider, who has a license from the Securities Commission to offer that service. And when he offers that service to you, he said, okay, I can formulate an IBC for you. And then you say, and then the FCSP will say, and you don't even have to put your name on it. I'll put my name here as a nominee. I can also offer you directors and officers, all from out of my office. So at the end of the day, when it's time to file it's a Bahamian IBC, we look at who the directors, they're Bahamian, so it's not going anywhere. But that's less income for those countries. And we're not the only country that does it.
No.
There are other offshore companies that does it. And there are other mainland countries that do it. But the mainland countries are not the ones being prosecuted and persecuted. It's us. So that's what you have to look at. You could convince them to live here. And get permanent residency. That's one way.
Question, soon as you brought that point, when they become a permanent residency, that means they can get a Bahamian passport? They would have to renounce their citizenship somewhere else, wouldn't they?
No, I don't think they get a
They
passport.
get
They use the
residency
residency
card.
card.
In the field, if you provide me with your passport, which is your primary way of identification, I use that as your nationality. Therefore, wouldn't that still categorize you to a certain jurisdiction taxing?
That's for an individual. Depends on how you structure it.
But under compliance, I'm taking on
Yeah,
compliance. I have to do all
yeah.
my full due diligence.
That's fine for that.
Okay, that's what I was wondering.
Yeah, that's fine for that. But it's the structuring is what they're after. So in the case of Smithstone and Birmingham, the court declared that it was an agency arrangement between the parent and the subsidiaries. So again, you could bear in mind a lot of subsidiaries are here. First, we had branches in the financial sector, which means that they were one. And then they moved because they wanted more hands-on approach by the parent. Then they had subsidiaries. The subsidiaries mean that the mind and management was here, even though they took instructions from abroad. But look at it now today. Are subsidiaries the right way to go?
Not at this point.
What happened over the time with subsidiaries? All profits were remitted, right? Yeah. Was any of it put back here in the local economy besides salary?
No.
And rent? And light? No?
Corporate philanthropy.
Yes. And so now you see the next movement. What's the next movement? And you're working in this industry, what's the next movement from a corporate side?
It's hard to say. I mean, we just took on a
Cost.
trust.
Cost.
The cost, yes.
Cost.
Because we just took on
Cost is too high.
a whole trust and they're not even sure why they did it. So I can't even say. So the
Took it out
cost-
from where? Which jurisdiction?
No, we acquired a trust here.
Here, locally? They were closing?
It was a purchase. We're supposed to broaden the existence. There's corporate and then there was trust. We didn't have a trust license. So you acquire a trust with already existing license. So you have two facilities. Yeah, the cost is apparently come across flashing like radar. So
Because it's not
Something.
just in buying the book of business, but the
No.
expertise that you need. You have to pay trust personnel plenty money because of the expertise. And they're specialized. So here it is now, you move to what they call cost. So you see a lot of the commercial banks have outsourced, and that's to do with cost. The whole point of incorporating, moving from a branch where everything is one to subsidiary standalone is, if I decide I want to open up a subsidiary, which means forming a whole company with its own board in each jurisdiction where I operate, then that means what? You have to make a profit, right?
It needs to exist for profit.
Exists for profit. So when you begin to lose money, then what happens? You have to find a way to streamline it in order to make a profit. And ones that are not profitable, you have to close.
Is that what happened with the banks?
Yes.
You think it was that they wasn't making a profit, or is that
I think it's a fact.
or is it wasn't the profit that they were anticipating?
They've been making profit for the last 25, 30 years.
But it wasn't the profit that they were anticipating, correct?
Losses were too high.
Exceed the profits. But that's a loss.
Yeah. And then after you look at the loss from the products, then you look at your expenses. And what is the highest
banking
expense?
fees were so high.
Mm-hmm.
Banking fees were so high.
That's just operations.
That's
That ain't
operational.
have nothing to do with what they want to retain back.
No.
That's
Don't
interest.
forget now, this is a subsidiary and you have a parent. Your job is you have to make a profit as an entity by itself.
Standalone.
Because you have a parent, you have to remit some of that profit back
And plus be able to operate.
and be able to operate. That's how you run a company. So if I'm not making sufficient profit in order to send some back to the parent, we have a problem. And that's why you also see in terms of the way in which the banks operate has changed. In terms of mind and management and control. Because you have the entity here, but where's the mind and management? When approvals go outside the jurisdiction.
Referral.
The decisions are not made here locally. They're made in other jurisdictions. Do you know that?
I mean, yeah, because I would tell you, I was working at an accounting firm, and I can remember the day when Lloyd's Bank closed. I was working upstairs, and the World Trustees were down out, and I saw all the grand exodus, everybody coming outside. I was like, what's going on? And I worked at Lloyd's for a little bit as a student, and so I knew some of the people in there, and I was like, it was like they decided that, headquarters decided that they're closing.
Yeah. But that's what all you see all of the Canadian banks did. There's a recession. You cannot pay your mortgages. Some of them weren't paying it before then. And so you give them a leeway. But when the parent speaks, and I'm expecting to get this amount from you and I can't get it, then things have to change. You have to streamline it and bring it in shape. And one of the ways in which you do that is automation. Automate things, and you get rid of people. And automation is the thing today and will be for a very long time. Everything is automated. To open an account, you don't need anyone to do that.
Just open an account from my bank.
Yeah, but that's a standalone. A bank that has a parent have funds for technology. You do it yourself. All by yourself. You don't need one single human being. That's the way of the future. You realize when you fly a plane, no one is actually flying it.
You think you won't tell me that?
That's the way it is. He's only there in case there's trouble,
Yeah, the
turbulence.
same thing with ships.
Yeah, just they computerize it. And it goes. That little tram you run in the airport back and forth in the air, and you're gonna get your car. It's a computer. Let him miss a kick and you tumble over. You'll see. Alright, so the first exception to the Solomon principle is when there's an agency relationship. We just finished discussing that when it has to do with a parent and its subsidiary. And based upon the circumstances and where the mind and management is and the control, the courts could determine that, guess what? This subsidiary is only operating as an agent of its parent and not as an entity by itself. The second corporate structure, when they say the Solomon Principle, there's an exception, is when they say that it is a mere facade. And I told you that's when the courts go behind the actual company and look to the shareholders, piercing the corporate veil or lifting the corporate veil. So if the court finds that the corporate structure that's created by the shareholders or the principal is a mere facade which is designed to conceal the true origin, ownership, and operation of the business, they will disregard the Solomon Principle of separate legal existence and reach for the shareholders behind the facade or the corporate veil and make the company and shareholders one and the same. Now, I don't think it'll happen this year, it won't happen next year, but maybe 2 years down the line. It depends on how the laws of each new jurisdiction is drafted. If they can't get the information they need now, I could see them trying to see if they could pierce the corporate veil for the IBCs to go behind it. Because remember now, they have a nominee for the shareholder, so you don't know who it is. And even though some of those nominees is in the name of a person, not a company, behind that is a nominee agreement. And then the same thing with the nominee directors. There's an agreement behind that. And so in essence, you don't know who owns it.
So the nominee could be a person or another company.
Yeah. So you still don't know who owns it. So I'm telling you, each one of those countries are preparing their budget just like ours, and where they have a shortfall, that's what they're after.
Question for you. I did something recently with one investor. They were looking, and the investment board required to know who the beneficial owners were. But we're still it's disclosing who the beneficial owners are.
You have to.
I mean, so it's just disclosed to the Bahamian government.
Yes, to the government.
But not
just like if you open a bank account, like how she did the trust, she must know who is the ultimate beneficial owner. Who's the human at the very top.
Okay.
But don't forget now, the pressure's on us to make that public. You see what I'm talking about? And if they can't get it through the way that they're going now, then what they'll probably have to do now is try to put these companies in court to go behind. Because it's not just us, like I'm saying, who provide this service. You have St. Vincent and the Grenadines, you have St. Lucia, you have all these little offshore, they all provide this service. BVI, Cayman, all them. So when they finish crossing information all over the place and they're not getting any money, this is going to be another problem. You have to spend more money flying to Europe. You have to look at the bigger picture. So the facade test was established in the case of Wilson versus Strathclyde Regional Council, which concerned the amount of compensation payable on the compulsory acquisition of a certain land by a local authority. The land was owned by W&S. W held 20 of the 30 issued shares in S Limited. The remaining 10 shares were held by his wife. The land was occupied by C Limited, which carried on its business from there. Shares in C were held 999 by W and 1 by his wife. W argued that he, C Limited, and S Limited should all be treated as a single entity embodied by himself, who should be regarded as the owner and occupier of the land for compensation purposes. You think his head was good?
What was he smoking?
I don't know. The court rejected the application to pierce the corporate veil, as this should only be done in special circumstances where the court was concealing the true fact, where the company was concealing the true facts. The court found that there was no ground for treating the company as a mere facade, so that W might claim to be treated as the owner and occupier of the land. C Limited, which carried on its business from the premises, which was to be compulsory acquired, had no control over the owners of the land over S Limited and W. W held only 2/3 of the shares in S Limited, while S Limited had no interest in C Limited. Therefore, W could not be treated as the sole owner of C Limited, as the one share was held by his wife was in the nominee capacity. Therefore, the corporate veil could not be passed to the effect that W was the true owner of the business of C Limited or the assets of S Limited. C Limited, as the occupier of the land and owner of the business, was responsible for any direct loss as a result of the compulsory purchase. Courts will also lift the corporate veil where their determination the corporate form is being used as a sham or facade to evade the company's existing liabilities or to defeat the law. And this is the point I'm saying. I can see them in their far-reaching clause in another 2 years if they don't get the money they're looking for. You see how they just passed all of their new data protection laws in the EU. Just step by step. You better learn how to plan these.
Hold on, but wait a minute, you need to ask who got the land for that first.
The government grants
That's true.
land. Need to start applying. That's
Oh,
not true.
exactly. But everything in this country.
That is not true.
Stop it.
Yes,
I need to get
you
started.
I
know.
disagree.
I agree with him.
I disagree. I
Yeah,
put in
agree,
mine.
I agree.
No, I put in mine.
There you go.
Took
Where
3
did you
years
put
and I
yours
got
in?
it.
When did you put yours in?
I got it last year. I put it in 3 years before that. And I got it. My sister put into hers. She got hers too.
On Nassau?
You don't get crown
Don't
land
get
on
caught.
Nassau.
That's what I'm saying.
Why you want crown land here?
I live here. Where is supposed to go?
Why you want it here? What you can do here?
Remember this land for farming now.
You
Yeah, exactly.
Comment.
So
You
you
would
need to
do
go on the
farming
island.
here,
Go
go
to
to
the
the island.
island.
And then turn around and have to ship everything or be having someone haggle me over for every other thing? I kinda got an
Excuse
import
me,
of produce as well,
other
but I'm
people
just saying.
farm and it goes out of the country.
This I do know.
Okay, but that's the
I
route you
can
want
tell
to
you
take.
about the produce, but why? Oh, well, anyway.
What?
Okay, it's all profit. That's the point of it. I forgot. Carry on.
Of course. Focus.
I gotta go apply.
I know.
It'll take a while, but you apply.
Yeah.
And you send in your plan. And then you just keep
Your,
calling.
your farming plan?
Yeah.
Why is it folks?
How's that?
Huh?
Yeah, I was going to say.
Because most people who get crown land don't use
Yeah.
it.
Oh, no,
The farmers
no,
that they
no,
get
no,
on
no,
their
no.
time.
Let me tell you, you can take that risk.
But
But I have been there when I hit them on the phone and they said lease denied, cannot be renewed. You didn't use it for the purpose.
Yeah.
I was
So
gonna
you
But
may
they
say,
have
have
a
a
long
time.
run,
Yeah, people
you may have a
That's
long
the
run,
time.
but trust me, it'll get cut off.
because guess what? In the news recently, just this year, they said that they was actually going to review those people
It
They've
was
been
about
doing that.
time, several
who
decades
have
late, but
crown
anyhow.
land
Yeah.
and they're not using it for the purpose for which it was
Yeah, they will
obtained.
take it from. But I'll tell you one good thing about brown lands.
I want you to know
If
that
you
you
will
will
have-
have.
Subdivision. Yes,
It will.
that is true.
You can give it to a family member.
Okay.
It doesn't stop.
As long as it's used for what it was
Exactly.
used for.
So you can just continue in the family.
Question
You
for
just
you.
pay your
For
annual
which uses
fee.
will crown land be granted?
Farming.
Is it a percent
Only
or
for
something?
farming?
There's some
Flat rate.
land designated for farming and some is for resorts. Like if you want to do one little bed and breakfast or something like that.
Okay,
They-
I
they
can
have-
do a bed and
Yeah, they're
breakfast.
just in different parts of different islands and different thing. But you need a plan.
Percent, profit percent, or just flat rate? You said pay your fee.
The what?
You said pay your fee. I'm asking, is it a percent of the
I pay
profit
$56.
or? Okay.
Okay.
Flat rate.
5 acres. All you need is patience. No, but I'll tell you, after you're not sure you're gonna get it. Then you get it. And then you find out it's cost.
Okay.
You now have to find money. Because before you farm, you have to fence it in. And fencing is expensive.
Do they give you a time limit once
get
it's been
going?
approved?
To get
Do you have
started?
do you have a time limit in which you have to start your farming? Or,
They didn't give you a fixed time.
Okay.
They just said they're going to inspect it. But
okay,
then I go in to pay for this month. I'm gonna tell them I got my first quote for the fence,
okay,
which is too high. And I'm gonna ask them how or where can I go to get financing.
Okay.
Because remember they'd given people financing before and they didn't pay, so I don't go calling up and I owe
Say
you.
you owe the
Right,
right.
so I wanna ask them what's the best way to go to get it? Getting the plants is one thing.
Is that public?
What?
Lands and surveys provide farm planning?
No, you have to do your own plan.
That's my
What you're
point.
gonna
That's
grow
ignorant
and
to this
how
whole
you
situation.
have to do that yourself.
Okay.
And then you have to know how to farm, because you're gonna have to have an interview.
So, so this is for real.
Yeah, this is for real.
And you had an interview.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I
So
do
you know
lots
how
of
to
knowledge.
Form, where can I find the form?
How do
The
we
form
learn
is
this
at, the
farming?
form is at,
Yeah, yeah.
the form is at
This is
the office by the bridge.
Ministry of Agriculture type thing? By the bridge, not BIC building,
On the
pink
way
on
to
the
the
Oh, I
bridge.
know what you mean.
Around to the corner.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I know.
right in the back there.
What is,
Why don't Bahamians know
Produce
about things like
exchange?
this?
No, you on the wrong side, this side. The old bridge, where the light is,
Yes.
make the first right.
Uh-huh.
Go right behind there. Yeah, who?
Used to be there, right, in that building.
Yeah, right behind it.
Okay. By the Ambrosia building.
Yeah.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
That's where you go.
Name of it, please?
You also the name, farmers, agricultural, whatever you call
Okay.
it, yeah. But you have to put in your application and then you wait. Cause don't forget now, if they, I don't know how they do it, I don't know, let's just say they say, well, we're only doing this area right now.
Mm-hmm.
If they have people there who are not using or you have to wait until they terminate those,
Mhm.
and then they'll reassign it.
Do you have to identify a piece of land or
They do that.
they do that?
Okay.
You might as well get your piece of the rock before all the investors.
Exactly, because once you get it,
Final segue.
like I say, you can pass it on to another family member. Yeah.
And you can build your house on it, eh?
No.
No.
It cannot be permanent.
No, nothing permanent? I mean,
No,
a
not for
farmhouse.
farming.
A
farmhouse.
farmhouse.
No, you can build a house on it. No, you can build a house on it. You can build a house on it, build it on stilts,
Right.
because it can't be permanent. It's a farm. So you can stay there if you want to. No, you can stay there.
As Harvard and production needs necessary, that's.
Yeah, you
part
can
of
live
why
there
it's
when you say you come in to inspect
But
the
you can
farm
have your farmer
and
living
then
on the
outside you put
land.
your storage with your
That's how we got in this
whatever.
first issue with all of these immigrants in case you didn't know.
Yeah.
The quote unquote workers who came and built their homes. The mud and the
Yeah.
whatnot.
Mhm.
Yes.
But you need to find an avenue. You need an avenue. Food for thought.
Yes, definitely.
Vital segue.
What? Segue? So circumstances where the corporate veil or separate legal personality will be lifted or pairs, where there's a single economic unit, and I have the case of Adams versus Kate. If there's an agency, evasions of limitation imposed on conduct by law, or evasion of the right of relief, which third parties already possess. And I give you the case of Reed Company. So the significance of the Solomon Principle in relation to property: a company is the beneficial owner of its own company. It does not hold it as a trustee for its members, and its members have no legal or equitable interest in the property. Shareholders' members also cannot insure the property since they have no legal or equitable interest. You understand that?
Explain, please.
What I'm doing here is distinguishing between the Solomon Principle, meaning a company is a separate legal entity, versus, and its members are only, their liability is only to the extent of the shares that they've invested in the company, versus what a trust is. If you own assets and you put it within a trust, you no longer own the legal interest in that property. And only if you become a beneficiary do you have an equitable interest in that property. So a trust and a company is two different things. And I say as shareholders cannot insure the property. So if you're a shareholder of a company, you cannot insure the property. The company insures the property. Versus if a trust, the trustee insures the property, not the beneficiaries, and not the settlor. Corporate liabilities. Notwithstanding the fact that a company is an artificial legal entity, the fact that it can and enters into contractual relationship with other parties can enforce the contracts which form the basis of their business transactions. So because the company is a person itself, it can enforce contracts. So let's look at contract itself. Parties wishing to enforce contracts entered into by companies must ensure that the commitments are within the company's capacity, and the executing officer or agent has the authority to transact such business. So whenever if you and I represented a company, and we wanted to enter an agreement, what's the first thing you're gonna ask before we sign? From a company perspective, what would you ask? If you and I were gonna enter in a contract.
With
How
the
much
company,
are
you
you
have the
gonna, how
authority.
much you?
Exactly, the authority. Do you have the authority to sign this agreement?
Are you acting as an agent? Are you acting as an agent?
Not necessarily as an agent, because you could be an officer of a company, but you only have a certain limit.
Yes.
So let's go to Oban, what happened there?
The sign is
So
on
the
the
lady
authority.
signed
He
the agreement,
signed
but she
somebody
has
else's
authority
name.
to sign on behalf of the company, correct?
I'd assume she signed on behalf of the company. I doubt someone would actually, in a whole press, sign something without the authority.
But it wasn't even her name.
It was somebody
It
else's
was someone
name.
else's name.
So she wrote someone else's name.
Yes.
How she could do that?
That's
Well,
why
they
we
signed
all
it.
yeah.
So
She
who was
signed-
signed? Is it a contract of this?
She signed somebody else's name.
But was it a contract or was it just a dummy paper?
I don't know.
You know how you go for press, sometimes it's just a
Yeah.
dummy paper?
It was a
They
contract.
said it was, didn't they say it was for their?
I thought it was, they said.
But it may have just been just for props.
I think
That's
if it
what
was.
they said afterwards.
I don't think
that.
Right.
No, but
I don't
sometimes
think
it's
it
only
would have
just for
been
props,
such
you
a
know.
big deal if it was a
If it was
prop.
only
Right.
for posterity, it
Now,
should
this
not
was-
have been
now, this was
so
the
much
press,
public
you know.
pageantry behind it.
Yeah, but I don't think it would be such a big deal if it was just for prop. They shouldn't have gotten into trouble for that. And he had to, Mr. Menace had to come back and say, and retract his statement and say they did missteps and all
Right,
that.
she didn't realize or something.
That tells you that that's fishy,
That's
man.
nefarious man.
Yeah, but then she should have known she didn't have the authority to sign.
Well, I think
She
she
did. Wasn't it?
He-
Was it he?
Oh, but he did, he.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So why did he sign?
That's
Because
right.
they
In front of
needed
the cameras.
They were, yeah, the cameras.
Oh, just in
were
front of
rolling.
the cameras, oh, okay. But see, the whole thing, even after you said all of that, it was null and void.
Exactly.
But yeah,
But then
they
the
say
company
they
was
say
saying
you can't get out of it,
Yeah.
and boy, but you
But
can't
whose
get out
name
of
did he
it.
sign?
The
He
like,
had
so
someone
for
else's name in the
example,
company. I can't remember who
Right.
it was, but I read it.
Or something like that.
like for example, if the paper was there, it had like Kimberly Miller there,
Uh-huh.
and he signed, but he
He
wasn't
signed-
Kimberly Miller.
No.
So he signed Kimberly
He
Miller.
signed
Yes.
someone. No, he signed someone else's name.
Right, he signed Kimberly
Right,
Miller's
that
name,
was-
but wasn't Kimberly Miller.
So if it was
Yeah.
supposed to be Mark Dunlap, he signed as Mark Dunlap, but he's not Mark
Okay.
Dunlap.
He signed his name
Right.
on it.
Or
no,
some,
no.
yeah, if.
So how come they're making it seem as if it's something you can't get out of? It was already a contract that was signed. How, so the other contract was already signed?
That's what I'm saying now. If he signed it, and he signed your name rather than his name, is null and void.
But
It
they
should
did
be null and
say,
void, but it's already said it's
but
been
they
a
said
contract.
the contract was signed before.
That's what I'm
Like,
saying, it was just a
Kimberly-
prop.
Right, it was just for show.
It was a show,
They
it
already
has to
signed
be a
and
prop.
entered
Yeah.
into
But yet
the
there were
agreement.
missteps, so how you still ironcladded into this contract if you haven't gotten
'Cause it's
the
already
EP,
executed.
the environmental protection?
And that's
She's
misrepresentation.
getting into details now.
That's
If
misrepresentation.
they already had a memorandum of understanding, remember how government works now, you have a memorandum of understanding, then you have a heads of agreement. So if they already had those things in place, it will continue, cause there are penalties if you go changing your mind, and those penalties are heavy.
Very.
Cause these people are gonna go out, and they're gonna go and get funds to do what they need to do, and they're gonna be penalized, and if they're gonna be penalized millions, they go send that to us.
I was just listening to
So
something.
you can't just willy-nilly as a country decide to go into something, and because the press making noise and opposition making noise and say, okay, we can scratch that. No, these people have already gone out and contracted with other parties. So what you gonna do? You can pay for all of them? How? I always tell people when you read
Don't you get a
the,
misstep.
no, that would just be, don't forget now, he's a doctor. He-
Mom,
Does he know company law?
Mom,
You
mom.
understand, but
The company is just like a company, didn't he have
No.
his people around him, did he have a
he should have the
client?
correct,
I have
right.
a child who's
No.
doing whatever, preparing their documents and stuff.
We in a sad state. He's a
Very-
doctor.
What I keep telling you all, people are appointed to certain positions that they don't know what they're supposed to
Very
do.
true.
Okay,
Okay,
know your role.
Yeah,
you back to my point again. When you operate a country, I always tell my students this, because you all are older and more experienced than the young ones who just come. I say, when you run a country, it's like running a company.
Yes.
Think of it that way.
Yes.
He's the chairman of the board.
Yeah.
Yes.
He's the one who is setting the strategies.
So you're surrounded by imbeciles.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily.
They're intellectual.
Yeah, some, yeah, but I mean, we ain't pointing no finger, but I'm saying, but it's the same way how it is on all the
On
other
every
boards.
board, yeah.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And people don't look at it. They choose because of favorites and who they like,
Yeah.
not
No,
who
but
can
you're
get the
supposed
job
to-
done.
You're supposed to choose because of expertise.
Exactly. That's what we're saying now. They're not doing that.
Scratch for scratch.
Yes. And so you realize when you enter into a contract on behalf of the Bahamas government, it's just like a company. We are the employees. And so they're supposed to be looking at what is in the best interest of the Bahamas.
Yeah.
And how will it benefit my people?
I was just at a conference yesterday, and they were talking about the fact that they're looking at imposing legislation which would protect investors
Mm-hmm.
coming into the Bahamas, so investors could sue and they could have their own rights and privileges, and
That's because WTO.
they were also looking at, I think they were also thinking back to Bahama and what happened with that fiasco.
That was greed.
Take that man business.
When he got some, he was awarded something in the US courts, right?
Just to go to the case. It basically said that their submission of no contest is null and void. It has to go to actual trial now.
Oh,
So
I thought
he
I
didn't
read
award
that.
nothing.
I know he
He
didn't get
does a
anything.
small win. Now he has to go to trial and do
So
stuff.
something went wrong. What went wrong?
With Bahama.
Clearly.
Plenty, they really need to discuss that.
From a company law perspective,
Yes.
that's how you look at it from a company law perspective, not emotional.
How did they take his company? I'm lost.
So if I could ask a question, do they have to pay him for using his name, the company name?
And his, yes.
Was that his brand?
That's
Is that his title? Is that
That's his
Bahama
idea.
was his contracted name?
35 minutes?
Oh, that's another thing.
Alright, so the first thing is you don't know the agreement he had with the Chinese.
No, really don't.
I decide, you say you won't make that bag there.
That's a partnership.
And I tell you, no. I tell you, I can lend you the money
Aye,
with these terms and conditions.
Venture
And
capitalists.
like, there you go.
plus stations or possible.
And so what happens when you default?
Take
They
again.
Okay then. I could say you could be late on 2 payments.
Okay.
And after the 3rd payment, clause 56 kick in.
Hello.
I take it.
Did you not read your contract?
You see what I'm saying? You have to be very careful what you sign on to.
Unfair
You think
terms
someone will be lending you that kind of money?
unfair terms and conditions.
You agreed.
But you agreed that's
You agreed.
the kicker.
You agreed. And he must have had his lawyer on the side, and the Chinese had their lawyer on the side.
Oh, that was a good given. Especially when they start fighting.
Exactly. So with the 4 corners, you really believe the Chinese would have just come and take it over just like that? He defaulted somewhere.
Yes, of course he did.
He defaulted. Because you remember they were saying he
kind
was
of
trying to
became
get finance elsewhere?
Yeah,
Yes.
he was. And
Okay.
then on top
So
of
he
that, he also
defaulted.
tried to file bankruptcy. So he
Exactly.
he was trying to swing out on
Yeah.
both sides.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
And at the same time, the other ones, the local ones, were positioning.
Mm.
You had two things going on at the same time.
Okay.
And that's why it got
Opportunity.
messy. Very messy.
They saw an opportunity.
Another one of them made it all right.
Yep.
Now they go last night, they had to bring
Why are you
it back.
smiling?
Just take me in the
She's sitting like the cat that swallowed the canary, but
Yes,
okay.
remember all the decisions are based
Well, you're part of the deal.
on contract
You
law.
didn't find out she's a part of the deal.
Are you okay?
Enjoying the snack.
Salted or sweet? I don't know.
Sour cream.
Oh yeah, those are
Yeah,
good.
okay.
They're
You see, my second paragraph says, a shareholder cannot enforce a contract made by his company. So it was company to company. Bahama versus CC. And you should have known the Chinese are ruthless.
You should have known.
But he could have looked across the Caribbean and he could have seen
Mm-hmm.
a lot of cases
Jamaica, Trinidad,
all over. They're all over.
every Caribbean island.
And on the whole of Africa.
I was gonna say
The whole
Africa.
continent. And they're also in South America.
And the US.
Yeah.
No, they keep their parts island.
Yeah,
I
I
know,
know,
right?
Yeah.
That ain't for you to know.
That's a big
Yeah.
deal right there between the US and China on that side. But
Yeah, that
everywhere
is
else
you
is
to
an
know.
But, I
acquisition.
mean, really.
Yeah, you're not supposed to know that. That's a secret. A company can sue in respect of tort committed against it and can be sued for torts committed by it, just like a person can sue for tort. All torts committed by a company is done through agents, directors and employees, and the company is liable for the acts of its agents if they're acting in the course of their employment or within the scope of their authority. A lot of these companies, when they ride around in these buses and they're acting as agent on behalf of other companies, I don't think they realize the extent of the liability they expose their principals to. Scooting in front of people, knocking on people, running red, like they don't realize it.
That's why they're supposed to report this driver if you see him acting
Mm-hmm.
carelessly or
Yeah.
negligent.
Because if a company has contracted with you to carry out a particular function, and that arrangement is one as an agency because you're acting on their behalf, then you exposes them to a certain liability. And that's why it's always good when you contract with a third party to ensure that they have liability insurance. You have to ensure that. And the extent of that coverage. Because you could end up yourself having to pay for some of that liability. Mm-hmm. The general rule is that the principal is liable to third persons in a civil suit for the frauds, deceit, concealment, misrepresentations, tort, negligence, and other malfeasance or misfeasance and omissions of duty of his agent in the course of his employment. Although the principal did not authorize or justify or participated in or indeed know of such misconduct, or even if he forbade the acts or disapproved of them. But although the principal is thus liable for the torts and negligences of his agent, yet we are to understand the doctrine with its just limitations, that the tort or negligence occurs in the course of the agency. For the principal is not liable for the tort or negligence of his agent in any matter beyond the scope of his agency, unless he has expressly authorized them to do so, or he has subsequently adopted them for his own use and benefit. In these cases, there is a personal liability on the part of the director, for the director's acts are the acts of the company and not his own. However, this is not the case where the director is a joint tortfeasor with the company. So we'll go into joint. A director may be liable with the company as a joint tortfeasor where he has authorized, directed, or procured the wrongful act. If a director is carrying out the duties entrusted to him by the company under the M&A, the circumstances for holding him liable as a joint tortfeasor would be infrequent. So I give you the case of MCA Records versus Charlie Records. There were two principles set out in that case. A director will not be treated as liable with the company as a joint tortfeasor if he does no more than carry out what he's supposed to do in the M&A. And secondly, a director will be liable with the company as a joint tortfeasor if he participates or is involved in a wrongful act that goes beyond the exercise of his control set out in the Articles and Memorandum of Association. A director is liable for his own tort regardless of whether or not he is a director. In the case of Standard Chartered Bank versus Pakistan, the managing director and the company was sued in deceit. The company was held liable. On appeal, the court ruled that the managing director was not personally liable as he had made the fraudulent representation on behalf of the company and not personally. The bank appealed to the House of Lords and was successful. Lord Hoffman stated that the managing director had made a fraudulent misrepresentation to the bank and the bank relied on it. By the law of agency, this representation and the knowledge was attributed to the company. However, the fact was that the representations and the knowledge were that of the managing director. He was the only human involved in making the representation to the bank. The managing director in this case was being sued not for the company's tort, but for his own tort. He was not liable because he was a director, but because he committed a fraud. A director may also be liable for negligent misstatements if there is an assumption of responsibility and reliance on the assumption. Because that's how misrepresentation works. Someone misrepresents a fact to you, you have to rely on that fact and then act on it in order for you to bring it in. Criminal law. A company is subject to criminal law as any other person. Statutory offenses which give rise to vicarious liability on the part of the company as an employer for the acts of its employees in the ordinary course of their employment. In some instances, liability may still occur even though the company's management has forbidden its employees to behave in a particular manner. In these instances, the court seeks to determine who is the directing mind and will for the purpose of the liability. And I gave you 2 cases there. You'll have plenty to read. Who said
Information.
So I have lots of cases in the back here. On page 22. On to page 23. You see some of them in the ads? It is not.
Then when we get to them,
What?
to these cases,
You gotta read them. That's for you to do. That's homework.
Okay.
Which ones do you want to present next week?
Say what? I stopped talking.
Why? I can rely on each one of you to do 5.
I'll do salmon.
You can do salmon? No, you're good. 5. Yeah, do 5. I'll just randomly pick them because some of these are on the same principles. Okay? So you have all, some can start from the bottom, some can start from the middle. Not the ones that are already in there now. Different ones, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Who's Odia?
We ain't complaining, it's more knowledge funds.
Yeah, that's all.
You can find it. It's not number 39. They
Or
go 39.
14 or 10.
Or 14. No, El Ajou, I just gave you the name. I didn't give you the facts. You can look that up.
Which one?
Number 10.
Oh, okay, so you can still do that one.
I think number 14 and 39.
You take out 14, you can take out
21.
39.
MCA Records and Charlie.
29.
39.
39. What does breathing out mean?
Oh, gee. That was it, we just died.
I know, that's not breathing. That's what you eat on them nuts.
39.
She had a shop in Bahama. You can see it was kind of a little ticklish, you see.
And I said I'm 21 because we did the MCA Records and the Charlie Records thing. I think there's one more.
Yeah.
And then there was Smith and Stone. Smithstone
And you don't have to do standard chartered. I have that on there. Yeah, you don't have to do 42.
Pakistan National Bank, 2142.
Williams, number 48 is a good case. Polypack, Makura, Guilford, Jones, Eagle Press, Adams versus K,
what's 5 not to do?
Of course. So you have enough to keep you busy. Alright?
So which one's not to do?
This one not-
39,
You don't be
14,
listening.
13. Yeah, listening. 13, 14.
21.
Okay.
4?
Who said 4?
I didn't say that.
I'm
Yeah, I don't know.
right. I'm 39.
We just made this one.
I could bring a question next week, eh? Yes?
What kind of question? It was short.
Like an exam question.
You said an exam question?
Yeah.
With the 5 cases?
No. You're gonna do the case. You're gonna do the cases for next week. We
I
just
know.
chat about it, and then before I begin chapter 2, I will give you a question of how the exam will look.
Can we talk
On
about
chapter
the
one?
project? Give an exam on chapter 1.
Will be these
No.
Self-assessment.
questions in.
What you asking me?
If we can talk about the project.
Yeah, when you get it,
Or we ain't getting it.
I miss a lot. What project?
I have to write it up to you.
Right there, right at the bottom.
I don't write it until I meet the students,
Okay.
because I have to see the balance.
I go with Cindy.
Yeah.
I
Right now, she's a solo man, so.
If I
Hey,
were
she's on a boat.
We all
And
know
she's
with
the only
Cindy
one who knows
experience.
how to row. So that means she gotta watch what you all do. As you go this one, go left, she in the back.
Oh,
you get it back
man.
right. Okay, you go left.
Man.
She on her own.
Oh, whatever.
Yeah, but we still have to don't make sure she don't
Yeah,
fall off
we
the
can't,
boat.
we
That's
can't
your
drown
job.
Cindy.
That's your job.
Yeah, we can't drown Cindy.
No, please.
No.
That's not fair.
on me.
No, none of that. Mm-mm. No. So I'll bring you a question next week, so you'll have an idea.
But it's not graded, right?
No.
No, so okay. Alright, we can
We'll do it, and then
Yeah,
we'll
then.
discuss it, and then we'll move into chapter 2. So make sure you bring your copies of the legislation.
Where can I get it from?
Online.
Online, right? Just go online and print it.
Companies have,
Bahamian laws and it comes up.
Oh, it's okay.
companies have IBCS.
With all the amendments?
Well, you can't do it if you don't have the amendments, because then in memory wise, you'd be
Behind.
behind. I know some people prefer, like depends like how what you do, you may prefer to use the IBC act.
Well, that's my bad.
That's what I'm saying, so that's your bad, so you prefer to use that. So while in class, you will compare it to the company's act, so you can get a broader scope. Those who don't know either will do both. So you can see the difference between the two pieces of legislation.
Yeah, this company was a rush. It wasn't
Yeah,
dive in.
and there's more. So we normally compare the two as we look at the different features. Alright. Happy studies.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Happy studies. There's no need to breathe out.
Thank you.
Yes.
See
See you next week.
Okay. Oh. Oh.
Don't be starting late because everybody should be here.
Well, then you have to see it.
Andre, from us, we were gonna skip the 12.
I was supposed to
right?
inquire.
12, the other class from 9 to 12, right?
No, I'm here, so it doesn't make a difference.
Okay.
I only went to get something to eat because it was only 2 persons.
Alright.
Remember? And I was waiting, they said it was 13.